Welcome to Savvy Business, Life Unscripted, with your host, Christina of where our guests share their wisdom and valuable business tips, empowering our audience to expand their personal potential.
J.L. Collins, welcome to Savvy Broadcasting today. I'm so grateful to have you here today talking about your latest book, your third book, Pathfinders, extraordinary stories of people like you on the quest for financial independence and how to join them. And guess what? A lot of our audience, business owners, are trying to do just that or are in the midst of doing that. So I know they're going to be excited to hear your story. Before we go to sharing all your wonderful details of your new book, share just a little brief history for our audience of your backstory and how you came to writing your book.
So I came to writing the book through the blog, which had its origins because when my daughter was young, because if you get money right, your life is so much better and you have so many more options that obviously, like most parents wanting the best for our children, I wanted that for her. And I made the mistake of pushing it too hard and too soon. And so I managed to turn her off to all things financial. And it occurred to me that I better get some of this stuff down on paper. So if the time came when she was ready to hear it, even if I wasn't around, it would be there. And so I started writing letters to her. And then a friend of mine who looked at them said, wow, this is kind of interesting stuff. You ought to put it on a blog. And I thought that's a great way to archive the information. So I did that, never dreaming that the blog audience would expand. And from there, I launched an annual retreat that unfortunately we did the last one last year, but called Chautauqua. And then I published The Simple Path to Wealth in 2016 because I thought, well, this is a great way to take all this information and make it a little better organized in the way it came together organically on the blog and a little more concise, and then I could just hand her the book. And then all these stories started coming to me from people who'd read The Simple Path to Wealth, and that was the genesis of Pathfinders, which is a collection of those stories and my commentary. And my daughter likes to tease me these days, by the way. She says, she says, no, Dad, if I'd listened to you when I was young, there'd be no blog, there'd been no Chautauquas, there'd be no books. Nobody would want to interview you. You wouldn't be talking to Christina today.
It's been a wonderful turn of events. Well, often, and this is the wonderful thing about business, is that often books and services and businesses come about because there's a need either by the person's creating the business, or they see a need in the marketplace and they're like, I could provide the solution. And you had this solution you were going to provide your daughter that is not only going to benefit her, but everyone who reads them and generations to come. So that's fabulous. You're able to do that. Now, the extraordinary stories that you share in Pathfinders, are these people who took your wisdom in your prior book and applied them and had wonderful outcomes, or they kind of had not so wonderful outcomes and learned from them?
So it's the former. As I mentioned, after The Simple Path to Wealth came out in 2016, I started hearing these stories. And a couple of years ago, when Harriman House, my publisher, and I got together and started talking about this, I reached out to my audience through my blog and what have you, and I invited them to share their stories. Because one of the things that had been striking to me is I wrote this book for my daughter, who was at the beginning of her journey and who's an American, and yet people from all over the world and at all different stages of their life, not just at the beginning, were able to take the lessons in it and apply it to their own situations. And I found that incredible and fascinating. And frankly, I didn't anticipate it when I wrote the book. So as these stories came in, after we pulled them out, we had we didn't know whether we'd even get enough for a book. Turns out we got more than enough and had to sort through and pick out the best. And then they kind of self-organized into what turned out to be 9 sections, starting with freedom and debt and saving all the way down to the end game and family. And yeah, so there's about 100 stories, some of them only a few paragraphs long, some a few pages, all of them, I think, intensely engaging. It's a great introduction to the idea, or if you're already on the path, it's a great way to be aware that you're not alone and see how other people are doing it and met the challenges along the way.
Well, I love that you're coming here to share on this and speak to this, because I think so many of our business owners, I've heard the story over and over again on Savvy, came to Savvy, had been maybe many years in a corporate job, was unfulfilled. Kids went off to college, maybe a divorce, but felt like, what's next? How can I serve the next several years of my life? I don't want to just go about something I'm not enjoying, or feeling that I'm using my gifts and skills to the greatest potential. And then, of course, as you just said earlier, when you're doing well financially, you can give so much more. You're not worried about the basic necessities or how am I just existing and getting by. Now you can think grander. How can I really serve, instead of just thinking about paying the next bill?
Absolutely. And financial independence is the point where you no longer have to work for money. Your money's making enough money to support you. But I tell people, this is not an on-off switch. The moment you begin the journey, you become a little bit stronger financially. It's like going to the gym, right? And the stronger you get financially, the bolder you are able to be in the decisions you make, whether that's around your job and maybe pushing for better terms or better income or what have you, or bolder in stepping away from it and starting a business like many of your listeners have done. So it's a journey, and it just makes you stronger. I can't imagine how limiting living paycheck to paycheck must be, let alone living paycheck to paycheck and borrowing still more money to try to maintain some arbitrary lifestyle that you've somehow been convinced is important when it's not. There are a lot of things we can buy with our money, but for me, the most important thing, the most valuable thing, the thing I wanted the most was my freedom. And you buy that by accumulating assets.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that we've been convinced that to attain a certain lifestyle, we have to go out there and get certain things to be happy. And then in the long run, all we're doing is chasing to pay off those bills, and we never get anywhere.
Yeah, I say this sometimes more crudely than I will on your program, but basically it's don't go out and buy crap that you don't really need to impress people you don't really care about.
Yeah, it's true. And I was in a sociology class a long time ago, and my sociology teacher,
I've been in that class with you.
yeah, but he had said to me, think about it. 100 years ago, life might have seemed easier. It wasn't. There was a lot more work to be done. We weren't as domesticated as we are now, getting to sit mostly in front of computers for a lot of jobs. But the point being is that they didn't have the expenses we have. They didn't have TV memberships and this, that, and fitness gym membership. Their life was fitness, stuff like that, a cell phone, all of these little things that we've been convinced we absolutely need to have the next smartphone or whatever it is, when in actuality, what's wrong with the last one we had? It's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, exactly. I think you make a good point. You go back, and not even a couple of 100 years ago, but the further back you go, I think you see two things. One is that life was a lot harder. It was just, and it was a lot more dangerous with, diseases and what have you than it is today. But it was also simpler because you didn't have as many options. You didn't have to, worry about whether your neighbors were buying this, that, or the other thing, because those things didn't exist. Well, now life has gotten a lot more complex, and there are a lot more temptations out there. And so it tends to feel more complex to us, but it doesn't have to be. A rich, free, joyful life can be, and in my world is, the soul of simplicity.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned something else very important, which is we don't have to go out and, buy things we don't need, or try to impress people that we don't even know that we're trying to impress. How did it work for you? Did you take a step back and realize where am I spending where I don't need to be? How did you become efficient with your spending or finances, and see where, because there might have been a point where you were not as efficient as you are today. How did you get to the point to being financially free?
Right. So my dad was a manufacturer's rep, and he was pretty successful, but he was a cigarette smoker. And as that eroded his health until it finally killed him, it eroded his ability to earn. And so I watched our family go from being very comfortable in very comfortable circumstances to being very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And that was a scarring lesson. And I realized at that point, and he was not a saver and investor, that as soon as possible, I wanted to be less dependent on my income being solely from my ability to work, to trade my time and labor for money, right? And that meant investing. Mm-hmm. So when I graduated from college and I got my first professional job, and this was in 1972, actually 1974, because it took me 2 years to get that job because the 70s were a pretty tough economic time. I just arbitrarily decided I was going to save 50% of my income because, as I said earlier, the thing I wanted to buy most was that financial freedom, that financial security. And, my first job out of college paid $10,000 a year. I knew that there were people living on $5,000, and that was a whole lot more than I'd been living on in college. So this was not a big thing to do. There was no internet at the time. There weren't even personal computers at the time. So I was kind of wandering in the wilderness and doing this. Mm. As it turns out, looking back on it, I think 50% is a sweet spot in terms of a savings rate. Now, interestingly, a lot of people hear that and they say to me, "You're out of your mind. Nobody can save 50% of their income." Well, I'm sorry, I beg to differ, having done it. But not only having done it, having now met countless people in this community that I write for who have done it. And in fact, many of those people in the community come at me from the other direction and say, "JL, 50%, you can do better. I'm saving 60, 70, 80% of my income." So you can choose whatever you want to save. Just understand that the more you save, the sooner you will have bought your financial freedom. The less percentage you save, the longer it will take. But again, that's okay because this is a journey. And just save as much as you can. You'll be stronger the moment you start doing it. And then depending on how motivated you are to get to financial independence, ratchet it up accordingly.
Yeah. And you make a good point. I know someone whose husband and her had been about 90,000 in debt. And luckily they were both working with a full-time job. So they made some much needed revisions in their budget. Maybe they moved to a smaller place. Some people are like, "Oh, but we have a house." So you move to a smaller house. They cooked at home all the time. She said, "We used to eat out a lot. So we got rid of that." Bottom line is they were able to take one of their 2 paychecks and put that completely into savings, which eventually turned into investing. But I think often just means that we kind of move around things how we're spending and what it looks like. And now I'd like to also talk to JL. Like if people say, "Okay, I have an income, but it's not that much," but there are other ways to bring in income than maybe the job you're working. There can be other ways that you build wealth that can add to what you put aside. Hi, everyone. I have a quick announcement. Christina of SavvyBroadcasting.com. As everyone might be aware who listens into the show, my second book just hit the stands this July, My Crazy Roommates. And each of the chapters has an illustration of an owl character that captures the essence of each chapter. Well, just before the book signing of my book, My Crazy Roommates, I had printed one of the owl characters on bookmarks. And they were such a hit that I ended up putting one on a mug. And friends and family and readers loved them so much that we decided to put together a shop with these whimsical owl characters, not only on Etsy, but in our very own website, SavvyBroadcasting.com. So for that and many other wonderful evergreen gifts that we'll continue to put up, as well as characters to come up for our future books, go to SavvyBroadcasting.com or crazynestcreations.etsy.com and get your very own gift today.
First of all, talking about that lifestyle inflation, there's a whole section in Pathfinders. That's the title of it, Lifestyle Inflation, because that is a challenge in unraveling it. And kudos to your friends who paid off the debt and learn that, can we live on just one of our incomes? Well, of course we can, because other people are living on an income like that. So, but in terms of, there is this this pushback that I hear when people come across this idea of achieving financial independence that goes along the lines of, well, that sounds great, as long as you have a really high-paying job and what have you. Well, the truth is, I've known people who made extraordinary incomes. I mean, $1 million+ level incomes, who are never going to be financially independent because they've constructed a lifestyle that absorbs all that money and then some. Mm-hmm. At the same token, I know people who've never made more than $40,000 a year who have achieved it. One of the things I love about Pathfinders is I can almost guarantee anybody who's listening to us today and thinking, "Ma'am, this doesn't sound possible for me." You'll read stories in this book from people who started from a much more humble beginning than you're probably in, and probably face some bigger challenges. So I've said on other interviews, if you read Pathfinders, mm-hmm. you will never again be able to look in the mirror and honestly say to yourself, it can't be done. Mm-hmm. Because you will have read so many stories of people who've done it. Now, you can still look in the mirror and say, well, I choose not to do it, but at least you will know that it's an option you could have chosen. And if I accomplish that, just letting people know this is an option, then whether or not they choose to go down the path or not, I mean, that's now at least they know they have a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that respect, my friend who did pay off her debt with her husband, what she started doing during that time is doing a written blog. This is several years ago on online WordPress, and it grew till she was able to monetize it years later. Yeah. And so, who would have thought sometimes the struggle you use to pull yourself forward can be the very money-making generator that could add to your wealth later. You just never know until you get started.
I've when I talk to people who are in debt and working their way out, which is a challenging thing to do, mm-hmm. because like your friends, you have to rearrange your life, first of all, to free up money to pay that debt down. Mm-hmm. That's hard, no question. And I have a lot of respect for people who do it. But here's the silver lining. Mm-hmm. If you do that, when you're finished paying down the debt, all you need to do is shift that money to now buying assets. Because you've created for yourself a wonderful discipline of now living on less than you earn and freeing up capital to do more productive things. Paying off the debt is the first step, and then investing in broad-based low-cost index funds, which is my recommendation, is the next step. And so no matter where you start, if you start at ground zero, as I say, it's a journey, you get stronger and stronger. But even if you start $90,000 in debt like your friends, the first dollar of that debt that's paid off, you're a little bit stronger than you were the moment before.
Yeah, it's like that example you gave about fitness. You start today, maybe you could barely lift a pound, but you keep lifting and that weight, or you keep exercising, it gets easier, you learn the skill. And then a couple of years from now, that particular exercise will be like a warm-up for you. It'll be like, oh, that's nothing. And the same will go for when you get really used to this and build that discipline. It's going to be like, that's nothing, putting that aside and doing this to
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it really does just become second nature, and you get stronger and stronger. And then, having financial resources, having financial freedom just opens up so many more opportunities and just leads to a much freer, richer life.
Tell me if you've seen this or experienced this, JL. I'm thinking that when you get to a point where you're not so focused on the basic needs or just paying off the bills, that now your brain is opened up more to be able to see the opportunities. They were probably in front of you all the time, but you were just too busy, crazed, running on that hamster wheel to even pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, I mean, it's got to be, and I've never done that, but I have to imagine there's so much pressure that's all you can think about. Jim Dahl, who writes The White Coat Investor, has a great quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but I'll get the basic of it out. He says something, the money is like oxygen. If you have enough of it, you don't think about it. But the moment you don't have enough oxygen, there's nothing more important than your next breath.
True.
By the same token, if you don't have enough money, there is nothing that's more important in your life than scrambling for that. If you have enough money, then that opens up the mental bandwidth to think about other things. And I'll also touch on that one of the things I've noticed, and this should make perfect logical sense, the wealthier people become, contrary to the narrative that we see in media and TV and movies, the more generous they become. Wealthy people, in my experience, are the most generous people that I know. And two reasons for that. I think one is, of course, they have the extra money where they're capable of being generous. But the other thing is that once you meet your basic needs, even if, you add some luxuries into that, you're going to have more money than is required even for those. And then people start looking around and say, well, what else can I do? And I think one of the things they discovered, certainly one of the things I've discovered, is one of the most selfishly satisfying things you can do with your money is help other people with it, is give it away.
Yeah.
So there's extraordinary generosity in this community. And, I think those are the reasons for it.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've also seen. But like we said prior, when you're in a hamster wheel of, I just got to pay for the basic necessities, I just got to crawl up there to live. You're if someone even says, hey, can you give me $1 or something? You're like, can you give me $1? I'm suffering here. But if you're, like you said, you're not worried about your basic necessities, those are met, you can take your mind off of that. Now you're free and opened up to be like, oh, now what? How can I serve instead of how can I just go out and get something?
There's an acronym FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And it's very clever. I don't use it because retiring has never appealed to me particularly. I've taken sabbaticals in the past, but it's interesting because people who do achieve financial independence and retire in the sense that they quit their regular employment, I have yet to meet anybody, and I've met a lot of people in this community now who've done this, who then go sit on a beach for the rest of their life. I mean, frequently they'll go sit on a beach for a while, but they go on to do other interesting, exciting, productive things. And sometimes those things throw off money. Sometimes it winds up throwing off more money than they were making before. Because if you're the kind of person who's going to walk a path like this, who's smart enough and resourceful enough to organize your life in a way to do it, you're probably not the kind of person who's going to do nothing. And sometimes, not only is that more gratifying work for you, not only is it potentially more profitable work for you, but it's probably has the potential of being better for the world in general, that your true talents get to be shared.
Yeah. And I'm guessing most of the people that just can't wait for retirement are in jobs, careers they absolutely completely hate. And the very reason they're wishing for retirement is because they want to be able to do the things they care about. Why wait? Work to pay off your debt, work to gain that financial freedom so you can do that, not when you hit the golden years, perhaps. Maybe you'll get to do some of those things, but get to do them beforehand.
That's a great point. And the other thing is sometimes I'll come across, especially younger people who say, oh, I'm not going to save and invest. I don't care. I love my job. I'm going to work forever. Well, it's terrific that you love your job and you love your boss and the company you work for, but things change. Who's to say that boss is not going to go take another job and the next boss is not going to be the same, or that your company is going to go out of business or be acquired, or you take a different job. I mean, things change. And as I say, just because you achieve financial independence doesn't mean you have to give up a job you love. It just means that you have an option.
Yes.
And if anything ever happens to that job, you're not stuck there grinding it out in that awful situation just to pay the bills,
Yeah, that's the key word. You have options. And now in your book, even the one prior, did you touch at all on the path to building passive income once your mind is free from paying the day-to-day bills? Did you hit on that a little bit?
Well, so The Simple Path to Wealth, my first book, the basic formula is live on less than you earn, avoid debt, and invest the surplus. And the book talks a lot about investing that surplus. And my recommendation, as I said a moment ago, is broad-based, low-cost index funds, specifically stock funds. So something like VTSAX, which is the fund that I personally own, it's the one that I have my daughter in. This is Vanguard's, and other companies have similar funds to this, but this is Vanguard's total stock market index fund.
So it's very broad.
So it's very broad, so you're very well diversified. Stocks are the single most powerful wealth building tool there is long-term. Owning it in an index fund is the lowest possible expenses, and expenses are always a drag. And the research has indicated, especially over long periods of time, and you need to be a long-term investor, it gives you better performance than actively managed stock picking and funds. So that's where I put my money. It took me a long time to get there, by the way. I've been investing since 1975. I actually achieved financial independence as a stock picker and picking actively managed funds. So it's doable. It's just a whole lot more work and a whole lot harder. Once I embraced indexing in 2000, it was like better results, less work. Where have you been all my life?
Well, now they hear it here. They don't have to drudge along learning for themselves. They can go right in there and diversify today and not wait.
I was wandering in the wilderness. My daughter, on the other hand, has started with VTSAX right out of the box. What a huge advantage. She'll be so much further ahead at each stage of her life than I was. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, absolutely. I was just going to say, this is awesome that people have been given this opportunity to actually begin their wealth journey today, wherever they're at. It's a good time to get started. Where can everyone get a copy of your book, Pathfinders, and find out more about you?
Well, probably the easiest thing is the answer to that question is both. If you go to my website, which is jlcollinsnh.com, you'll see opportunities to select Pathfinders and Simple Path to Wealth and what have you. It's pretty easy, or you just type them in and go to Amazon and you can find them.
Boom. Well, this has been a incredible, insightful chat. Thank you so much, JL, for coming today and sharing your great wisdom on Savvy Broadcasting.
Christina, it's been entirely my pleasure, and I'm honored that you would ask me to join you.
Have a great day.
Looking for a hilarious read? Well, check out my latest book, My Crazy Roommates. The names have been changed to protect the deranged. Step into the wild and unpredictable world of young adulthood in the heart of New York City. Brace yourself for a roller coaster ride through the trials, tribulations, and hilarious moments of shared living spaces with a colorful cast of characters. Fasten your seatbelt and get ready to laugh, cringe, and maybe shed a tear as you delve into the pages of My Crazy Roommates. So get your copy today, available at Amazon.com.